So welcome to the monthly Entrada membership masterclass, and I did change the topic to grief as a career superpower, and I will do my best to stay composed today and hope that you will be able to be patient with me as well. So we're going to be spending, if you would like to spend an extra 10 minutes with me, I will be offering a meditation at the end. That the core offering will be for 30 minutes for our class together today. And I'll invite you to make an acknowledgement for yourself of where you are and what you would like in this time. And where I live, work, and play is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Kikite First Nations. A little bit of housekeeping here. You'll see to the right, as you're looking at your screen, there's a panel, and there's where you can put questions for Q&A, and you can so just drop them in the chat, and you've already found the emojis. Thank you. And as mentioned, this is also live streaming on YouTube and Facebook, and those replays will remain there afterwards. Starting with a quote today that I have offered to clients over the years in working so much with grief is that grief and sorrow can offer us the capacity to grow. And I'll just offer for you to consider in this time together today and to be gentle with yourself. It's a very tender, vulnerable topic that we're exploring today, and one that is very present for me right now. It is just having lost Zuzu, our puppy, and thank you to everyone for acknowledging that and your messages of support as well. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Newton. I'm an integrative career coach based in Vancouver, Canada, on the west coast of Canada, and I've been doing this work for 13 years now. I did my own pivot about 14 years ago from corporate into this work, and I help clients find their career superpowers and meaningful work. I'll invite you to grab a pen and paper. Our members have the PowerPoint, and just offer for you to have that for yourself and to write down either on pen and paper for everyone, members or otherwise, anything that is particularly something that is helpful for you or makes you think of something or even reminds you of something. Just find that it helps go in more and integrate more when we can write things down. And I also will offer for you to set an intention for our brief time together today, and by having that intention, where your attention's going to go and where you would like that focus to be. So I'll just take a moment here to allow you to do that. And hopefully that was long enough for you to put something down. And I just want to, before we go into our agenda and what we'll be spending our time on today, I just want to offer, and maybe if someone has heard of this concept about kintsugi pottery, you could drop an emoji and let me know, or even just in the Q&A tab if you've heard of kintsugi pottery and that philosophy. And I'm going to share with you, for those of you who don't know, that it is a Japanese concept of pottery. And I offer this as a wonderful metaphor for grief and growth. And the idea is that a potter will take a piece of pottery and craft it and take time to make it perfect. This is also talking about being able to accept our imperfections, but then we'll deliberately break the pottery whether it be a plate, a bowl, a vase, whatever that object is, and then painstakingly will put the pieces back together. And what is between the cracks and mending the pottery is actually gold. And so kin is gold or golden in Japanese, and sugi is joinery. So you're joining with gold. And what you'll see there is something that is more precious, more beautiful. It's taken more time to craft, and it becomes more valuable. And so I offer to my clients, especially in terms of grief, what also happens is, if you look at this as your heart, those the gold in between are like your grief experiences. And imagine that, and plus the capacity. So the time has made it more valuable, and then the capacity because of the gold as well. So hopefully that offering for you is something that might be helpful as well. And so just as we go into our agenda, I'll just let you know what we're going to be exploring here as grief as our career superpower. We actually already did our intention here, and then we're going to be looking at defining grief and exploring our relationship with grief. Then helping you get to that concept of the career superpower from grief is using my grief and gratitude toolkit. And there's 3 aspects to that we'll explore together. And then and how that can be turned into grief as a career superpower. And as a bonus for anyone who would like the extra time to stay, about 10 minutes of me giving my letting go meditation. But it will also be available on, I'll make it available on YouTube too. What I want to offer about grief is that it is unique. And this image that I picked up looks like a fingerprint to me, but made out of nature. And so I just want to have you consider about grief being unique. And so it's not going to look the same for person to person. It's not even going to look the same for grief experience within the same person as you being the same person, because you're not going to be the same each time you have an experience. Even if you have grief that seems like it's right up against each other, each of those grief experiences is going to shape you and change you. And aspects to consider are time to grieve, finding your own rhythm and being compassionate about that. And so not comparing your grief to yourself, of how you have gone through grief before, or to others, or what's happening. And so inviting you to consider that. In terms of defining grief, I can't do everything that I know about grief in 30 minutes, but so the intention here is just to offer you some starting points that you can then go back and consider on your own, taking notes here, or go back and look at the replay if you wish. And so in defining grief, I'm actually offering for you of what your personal definition of grief is. And the close dictionary offering is that it is intense sorrow or deep distress caused by loss. But that loss could be precipitated by a career, a loved one, a loved pet, a relationship, health, homes, possessions, lifestyle, or freedom. And I think we all experienced, or most people experienced, the whole world changing a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, when our whole landscape changed in terms of how the world was before COVID. And so for you, what is your personal definition of grief? And so inviting you to consider that as well. And then another aspect in helping you collect more information and understand grief is exploring our relationship with grief. So, asking yourself, how do you relate to your grief experience? And is anyone familiar with the 5 stages of grief by Dr. Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? She's a psychiatrist who wrote a book about it in the late 60s called On Death and Dying. And you may have heard of the stages, even if you haven't heard of her, but she speaks of the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. And these are not linear. That's the important thing. In people simplifying her work, they would have criticized and said about it, like that she had offered it as something linear, but it's not. And so in your grief relationship, as you look at aspects of emotions and your relationship to each of those stages, that could be another way of considering how you relate to your grief experience. And thank you again for your interactions with the emojis there. And so another way of helping us explore is the idea of a grief story. And again, we don't have the time to go deeply into this. I did some of you may have remembered I did a workshop on this a couple of years ago. And that was a 2-hour experiential workshop. But I just wanted to offer you some of the key messages in there. And in there, in the grief story, it's just to have you consider that and think about a significant, and if it's too overwhelming to think of significant, maybe just think of a grief experience that you have overcome in your life. So something in the past. And then starting to have an inquiry and starting to have curiosity about that, of when did the grief occur? So what was the timing? What happened before and during the grief? So what was happening at that time in that period? And who was involved in the grief? Where did the grief happen? So going back to who, was it just you on your own? Was it your own experience, or were other people involved? Or did you lose someone else or something else? Or another little animal soul, like what has happened recently for my husband and I. And so who was involved in that grief? And then where did the grief happen? So that could be geographically where it happened, where it could be like where in your life stage did it happen, where did it happen in your body? So they're being very, very aware of, like, did you experience it as something physical? And there's also the aspect of the physical, emotional, and the spiritual, or the energetic way of exploring grief. And so where those levels were. And then what was the outcome of the grief experience? So what happened afterwards? And then finally, as you've put all that together and considered that, how did you navigate or manage the grief? And I'm going to just offer you a very quick story about someone who I heard about just yesterday. My husband made a little tribute for Zuzu and used a piece of music and a song by Emily Moore. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of her. I didn't know her name, but my husband played her song, and it's a soundtrack to Zuzu's little video tribute. And Emily's grandmother was one of the first women to succumb and die of COVID in early 2020 in North America. And Emily was very close to her grandmother, never got to say goodbye, had to have the funeral virtually over Zoom. And so in her way of dealing with the grief, she had watched the movie Up. I'm not sure if anyone's seen the movie Up, but it's a delightful movie, and it has some themes in it. I can see some emojis there, so I think some of you already know it. But so the music piece, if it's a spoiler alert for people who are watching this who haven't seen it, but the music there was written by Michael Giacchino, and the piece is called Stuff We Did, and it's when the old man is reflecting back on his life with his beloved wife who has passed. And so Emily took that piece of music, which is very evocative, especially in that scene, and she wrote words to it. And then she put a little piece of that on TikTok, and it went viral. And so then she was doing other things on YouTube and expanding her, processing her grief and expanding what she was doing with this. And she decided she wanted to actually go up and perform the song in a hot air balloon. And she is afraid of heights, so she had to overcome that. But even before she got the opportunity to overcome that, was a whole lot of logistics, trying to find someone who would take her up in the hot air balloon, but to do this with all her piano and all her equipment. And she kept on getting no, and she was about to give up. And finally, somebody said yes. And the somebody said yes because they had seen her do this wall. If you follow her story, and we'll share the link with you on this in the notes in the in the YouTube when we've got this video. And but you'll see her. There was a wall of photos, and somebody had seen it, and the wife. It was the wife of this hot air balloon professional, and he was so touched because they had experienced loss too, that he made it happen for her. And there's a team. It's a beautiful story. It takes about 8 minutes, and then there's a longer version too. So, but the reason I wanted to talk about Emily's story is because I just find that she took her grief and then her superpower, sharing her gift of her music, and then making all these things happen and sharing in a much bigger way with the world. So, that all came out of her grief with her grandmother. And so that's just was, to me, an amazing story about how she utilized that. And so I can see, thank you for the responses from people as well. But in terms of the grief and gratitude toolkit, there are 3 aspects to that too. They're just like to invite and acknowledge your grief, to explore the gift within the suffering of your grief, and then to transmute your grief as a resource using gratitude. And so the steps here, and again, I don't have time to go deeply, but I just would like to offer this for you to do on your own when you can make space for it, is to invite and acknowledge your grief. And that can be really hard to do because emotions that come up are, we don't like not feeling good. But what will happen is if you don't make some space to process and invite your grief, whatever resists persists, and it'll just make it stronger, and it'll come back and get you later. Some of you might have experienced something like that. It's hard, but necessary to invite and acknowledge your grief. And if you can't do it on your own, then I would offer for you to reach out to someone that you trust, that you could do this difficult work with. And in that invitation and acknowledgement is also the awareness. And in mindfulness, you'll have heard me talk about name it to tame it. So when we are aware of something, and we can do something about it. So that's very briefly about inviting and acknowledging your grief. The next step is, and this one will be a harder concept, but I coined through all my grief experiences and working with clients deeply in theirs, the saying of the gift within the suffering. And what I mean by that is that after a time when the pain is not so raw, and you can create some space and process a little bit more, you can find a way. And gift might feel too strong. Maybe it's just lessons or learning, but there is something that you have received from that suffering and that sorrow that you can turn to as a way and a resource. And I spoke about Dr. Kubler-Ross earlier, her co-author, David Kessler, an assistant at the, also wrote a couple of books with her, and he talks about the idea of meaning emerging from your grief. So sometimes people are trying to look for the meaning in their grief, but that might be too soon, as too difficult, or it might be too soon for some people as well. So I love that David Kessler offers that you could consider that the meaning is already in us, and the grief experience creates a place for whatever is coming up to emerge. And so it's really about what can we allow ourselves to endure in these times to increase our capacity. And so I just find that a really evocative and powerful way to look at grief and grief experience in terms of how we can expand our capacity and our capabilities, and then we become like the kintsugi pottery in that. So just offering that you might have your own version of the saying of the gift within the suffering of your grief. And then the next step in this toolkit is transmuting your grief into a resource using gratitude. And by transmuting it, it's another way, it's like transforming or taking it and shifting it. And so, by being curious about that and just being able to find, have there been any patterns in your grief? What's been familiar for you? What have you been able to learn about yourself and even about others in terms of your grief? And then just having a look at that and just seeing, could there have been any noble purpose to your grief, like when you could reflect back on an experience, and how just take a moment just to consider, do you push that notion away? Do you invite it? Does it provoke some curiosity in you to want to know more? And just everything is welcome. There's no right or wrong way of hearing what I have to offer. And this is only an offering. My hope is that you might be here today so that you can consider what could be important for you in terms of your process for grief as well. And then once you have got a better context and a better sense of that, or even if you're confused by that, I would invite you to discuss that with a friend, or maybe a group of friends in a community that you trust and support, that you trust you to support you through your grief. And then another piece is I find really helpful of using metaphor. So earlier I gave you the offering of the kintsugi pottery as a metaphor. But here on this slide, I've got a suitcase because I consider grief as a grief metaphor for journey. And you're welcome if anyone wants to drop into the Q&A of a metaphor that you might consider. So there's the idea of journey. Water is another one because it has so many different states and seasons, because they change and there's always shifting of them. So just considering, what would your metaphor be? It could be a word, it could be an image, it could be some sense. Just what would your grief metaphor be for that goes with your grief story and with your grief experience? And so how can grief be a resource for you? I just realised that is missing a punctuation there, but we'll just put that in there with the upping of the end of my voice. So how can grief be a resource for me? It's like kintsugi, it's not perfect. So these are the 4 steps I'm going to offer you, is that taking from what we've briefly touched on for today is what your grief story is. So giving yourself some space to fill in what your grief story is. And we're bringing this all together. And then from what you have either heard today, or maybe you've heard in the past, or maybe you learn about yourself in exploring about your grief story, is 2 positive or supporting aspects of grief there might be more, but to just being really gentle with yourself and just coming up with 2. And then also 2 challenging aspects of grief. And so this is oftentimes, there's way more than 2 challenging aspects of grief. And one, as an example, would tend to be self-judgment, as you not being patient with yourself. And I'm supposed to balance it out. I should do like a positive aspect of grief is about bringing people closer. I've just had so many messages from people that I haven't heard from for a long time, and the kindness of people extending. And so just that grief can unify people and bring people together, as strange as that might sound. And then we talked about the metaphor of grief. And so what that looks like altogether is like putting this and using this information to help as a resource for grief. And grief is a career superpower. So if we reflect back on, it doesn't matter that if you didn't see it, but last month I talked about the idea of a superpower, and it's an exceptional, extraordinary power or ability. And so much like Emily, what could you extend and for yourself to turn your grief experience into a career superpower, whatever that grief experience is. Again, career or loss of a person, friend, pet, belongings, lifestyle. And so my career challenge for you, to those who are willing, is to take the information that you've heard today and ask yourself and explore, how can I use my grief as a career superpower, and how to utilize that? And so bringing all together in this time that we've had today, that has gone very quickly, is we set our intention and defined grief and explored our relationship with grief and looked at the Grief and Gratitude Toolkit and how we can use all of that information for grief as a superpower. And we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just invite you just to take a few seconds. You set an intention at the beginning of our time together, and I'll invite you, if there's any messages or if there's anything that was helpful for you that you heard today, anything that made you think of, or any takeaways from our time together. So I'll just be quiet for a few seconds for that, while you hopefully can write something down. And I know that wasn't very long at all, but hopefully there's some messages there. And if anyone's feeling brave, you're welcome to put it in the Q&A, or even just drop an emoji if there was something helpful that came out of our time together today. And then also offering to say thank you. And thank you for the emojis, and then thank you to you all for being here. And as I'll be on my website, there's a feedback form, and you're welcome to fill that out. And if you do and leave your email, I'll send you the grief story worksheet as a gift. And of course, for my members, there'll be bonuses. There'll be a bonus resource for feedback too. So thank you, all those emojis. So I realize I'm at the end of the time. This is my contact information for if you have any questions of anything that's come up today. And then I also, for anyone who has the time, I am going to extend another 10 minutes. Maybe it won't be quite that long, but offer a grief and gratitude meditation. So if anyone needs to leave, because we're 2 minutes past the half hour here, and you're all still here, so that's really lovely. But did anyone have any questions just before we move to the meditation? Because if you do, in the interest of time, what I'll do is take them, and Yash is here, my wonderful assistant, and I will email you the answer. But you're welcome to drop the questions here or send them to an email after. Okay, so thank you for staying with me and staying so attentive. And I'm going to start the meditation. And this is an image from that Paul took during one of our intense periods of grief that we had over the years. Another time, not the most recent one with losing Zuzu, but I'll invite you either to have a soft gaze there, or maybe close your eyes and go inward. You don't need to be looking at a screen anymore. And I'll start the meditation, just following the sound of my voice. Letting go and grief and gratitude meditation. Bringing awareness to your breath in your own way. No need to change it. Offering patience with yourself and self-compassion. There's no obligation, no should or expectation from this meditation. I invite you to breathe in and out 3 times with your own rhythm to ground yourself further. On each in-breath, hear the words courage. On each out-breath, hear the words letting go. Notice any thoughts, feelings, body sensations, images, memories, anything that comes up. Everything is welcome here. What might unfold if you could be with the possibility of acknowledging your grief? I invite you to allow the healing intention. My desire to let go is possible for me regarding your grief story. Become aware of any thoughts, feelings, emotions, body sensations, memories, and/or images, any senses that are evoked, that arise as you consider this idea. My desire to let go is possible for me. Visualize or experience your heart as a beautiful piece of kintsugi pottery. It can be as big or small as you wish. You are the artist of your own heart here. This masterpiece may have any sort of cracks or designs you imagine, and the gold leaf in your memories from your grief experiences and stories fills in the spaces of the shattered pieces of your heart. If you notice any parts of you that do not want to let go or see your heart as a masterpiece, acknowledge that part. Allow these parts to represent challenges or obstacles in your grief journey. They are welcome too. And offer self-gratitude if you've already released your hardship. With your awareness, you can now breathe in the version of your personal and unique grief experiences to help you clear out any stuckness or blocks. Perhaps you may offer compassion to those parts or request that they step aside just for this moment. Imagine you are energetically cleansing your challenges and obstacles into a vortex, allowing your grief to transmute into gratitude, but only when you are ready. You will know the rhythm. You will know the time your heart is beating at your speed of life, inviting in compassion and gratitude for your grief experience that is so uniquely yours. Observe what comes up for you as you reflect on noticing the chapters in your grief story. Perhaps imagining that time in your future when you may be open to releasing your grief. Notice if anything has shifted to allow the intention, my desire to let go is possible for me regarding your grief story. I offer that you may allow yourself to carry this healing energy and quietly consider this as you move through the rest of your day or evening. In a moment, I'll invite you to start bringing awareness to your breath again. Just focusing on your breath, and as you do, gently moving your fingers, toes, making small movements with your arms, legs, and perhaps gently rolling your neck and head, slowly stretching. And when you are ready, as you hear me count, I'll invite you to softly open your eyes and come back to the room. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alert and awake and be here now. So thank you everyone for staying for this time and staying for longer. And I will, as I said, make sure and offer for you the recording of that. It'll be a little bit different to this one of the meditation, and then the other story, the beautiful story about Emily Moore as well. And thank you again for everyone who has been here today, and whatever you're experiencing, I wish you healing and gentleness and compassion and love. Thank you, everyone. Namaste.
Where did you go? I miss you so. I'm all alone. You're up there, you're up in the sky. It's hard to see beyond the sun, beyond the trees. But oh, I can feel you here. Every day you're with me. Oh, dreaming hard to see beyond the sun, beyond the trees, but oh, I can feel you here every day you're with me. Where did you go? I miss you so. I'm all alone. You're up there, you're up in the sky. It's hard to see beyond the sun, beyond the trees, but oh, I can feel you here every day you're with me. Oh, where did you go? I miss you so. I'm all alone. You're up there, you're up in the sky. It's hard to see beyond the sun, beyond the trees, but oh,